All right, everyone, welcome to the Maxon booth here at SIGGRAPH 2024. We are in for the final presentation. I know everybody's sad. There's a lot of weeping, sad faces in the audience, but they're also happy because up next to my left, once again, another presentation so nice. I had to do it twice. So let's give a big Maxon welcome for Shawn Astrom. Woo!
Thank you, Matthias, and yeah, thanks to Maxon for having me out. Yeah, and I said this the other day, having me out here, but I am a Colorado native and live here in Denver, so it's just been nice to drive on over here, and thrilled to have SIGGRAPH in our home state. But yeah, so I'm just gonna jump in here and get going. So yeah. As Matthias said, my name is Shawn Astrom. I am the owner of SA Studios, where I freelance and sell all sorts of assets, such as these HDRI skies and terrains, and more recently, some 16K exoplanet maps that turned out pretty cool. So that's a lot of what I do for fun on the side. But today I'm going to be talking about client work. And but before I dive into all that, I wanted to touch on the fact I've been using Cinema for 18 years now, and it's just such incredible software. It's really been the backbone of all of the 3D work I've been able to do over the years. But I got my first design job at a company called the Firm Graphics, and there I was basically doing print flyers, and I was really intrigued with all this crazy 3D artwork I was seeing all over the place. And so that's kind of what got me interested in 3D. And it was around that time I reached out to a friend and said, hey, what's a good 3D program to learn? And he immediately was like, oh, Cinema 4D. And at that, 2006, I had never heard of Cinema 4D, but downloaded it that night and dove in, and immediately was impressed at how intuitive it was and easy to figure out. So this is just some of the work I did while I was at the Firm Graphics, and some of it is newer, but it was quite a fun job because we really got to just do whatever for the clients. It was pretty creative. And then shortly after that, I started working for a company called Citizen Pictures. They're here in town, and they produce a couple TV shows, a couple big ones for Food Network, and that's really where I got my hands dirty with MoGraph and animating in Cinema 4D, and camera animation, all that good stuff. Really happened around that time. This is definitely some older work, but some stuff that I thought would be fun to throw in here. And then moving along, if we jump forward a couple years, I started SA Studios. This is when I went freelance and just kind of wanted to get out and start working with other clients. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of the agencies around Denver here, Legwork, a couple others in here, and this is just some of the work for them. And yeah, moving along, if you zip forward 8 years, I got another really fantastic opportunity came my way. I got a job working for the Fisk Planetarium up in Boulder, working on all sorts of basically space films for NASA. And when they reached out about this work, I immediately was like, heck yes, that would be a lot of fun to do. So all Cinema 4D, and I really was kind of thinking, man, it can't get better than this. This is like an area that I really enjoyed, and there were some nice challenges working on these films. One of which we had to render everything at 4K by 4K, 60 FPS. So all of we actually believe we used Redshift on all of these projects, and it really came to the rescue when it comes to render times. And yeah, moving along, 2020, I got a call from a good buddy of mine, Chad Ashley, basically saying, hey, how would you like to come work at Greyscalegorilla? And I said, yeah, that would be amazing. So I wasn't too sure what they wanted me to do at first, so I was talking to Chad and said, hey, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, I need someone to jump in and help me with all these materials we're releasing. And so I ended up helping them out with several material collections. This first was this car paints collection. And that was quite the challenge to get a car paint shader that worked across all 3 render engines, Arnold, Octane, and Redshift. And then shortly after that, I did Tech Products, which was another really fun challenge. Ended up making close to 100 materials for this. And yeah, these are just all some of the marketing images I did while I was there. And one of the last collections was this Metals Volume 1. And a real challenge for sure. The goal was to get, the most physically accurate and realistic metals we could produce using a PBR workflow. And there's some nice resources out there for getting accurate refractive index information. It was just a matter of translating all that into the texture maps. But this one turned out really cool and was super fun to work on. And then 2022, I kind of went back to freelance, and this was around the NFT craze, so I kind of made a few NFTs for a bit there, and so that was fun. And then this last slide here just kind of shows some of my more recent work. Lately, I've just been focusing heavily on a lot of product visualization and renders for all sorts of clients like Bose here. And I have a wonderful jewelry client that I'm working with more recently. So yeah, I'm just going to play a quick reel so you guys can see some of the motion stuff that I've done. And yeah, we'll check this out. And that's that. Thank you. Yeah, so finally kind of diving into my talk here, I really one of the things that I love so much about Cinema 4D is all of its simple workflows and simple setups that you can create within the software. Just really allows you to stay creative and not get too lost in all the technical side of this, what can be pretty technical work sometimes. So I wanted to share a couple projects today, and this first is for this really awesome agency I have worked for a bunch in the past called Carbon VFX, and this particular project was for the Maryland Lottery, and it was this kind of roller coaster concept. You might have seen some of it in my reel there, but essentially we had about 3 weeks to build a 3D roller coaster, rig it up, rig up all the characters, which in this case were the scratch tickets riding this roller coaster. We had a bunch of signage to do, and flags and clouds, and so it was quite the undertaking. Fortunately, the creative director, Ian Bradley, was fantastic and had a very clear vision of what he wanted. And then I worked with one other Cinema 4D artist by the name of Young Ho Kim, and he was amazing to work with as well. So between that little group, and then we had a wonderful Newt compositor in the end, it really came together pretty great. But again, like working under a 3-week deadline was pretty absurd for a project this complex. So I will just quickly play that video so you guys can get a better look at how that one ended up. So yeah, pretty cool spot, pretty creative, and it's not. Sometimes something like that, a project like that is kind of unusual in that the concept was really fun. So like I said, one of the challenges was modeling the coaster, and then another challenge was rigging up those tickets. And for that, we used Mo splines, and then I built a custom HDRI for lighting the entire environment, which also really helped out and allowed us to have some pretty good render times on this one. So again, all Cinema 4D Redshift. So I'm going to go through all this here. We're going to model a quick coaster here in Cinema, and then I'm going to show you the ticket rigging, and then demo how quick the renders were. So I'll just jump into Cinema here. And yeah, so when I'm working in Cinema, I really do try and start out as simple as possible. So in this case, it was kind of all about getting a quick model going. And so I always try and start with like proxy geo. And I'm just quickly going to create a proxy coaster car. We'll go 16 on the fillet there, and then add a few subdivisions. If I turn on the wireframe here, you can see the geometry on this cube a little better. And if I make it editable by hitting the C key, I'm just going to call this car real quick. And, oh, there goes the Wacom tablet. So if I go to a side view here, I'm going to start to just cut in some geometry. I'm going to go into edge mode here and select my geometry and grab, well, it used to be called the knife tool, but now it's called the line cut. And if I just get in here and do a few cuts in the geometry, oops, I need to actually undo that a couple times. And I need to turn off, this tablet has a touch mode, and it was picking up my palm, so I'm turning that off. But in the line cut tool, there's an option here called visible only, and I definitely want to have that unchecked. So now the line cut tool is going to cut all the way through the geometry. And so now I'm slicing all the way through. And if I just make those cuts and then hop back to my perspective view here, you can see what I've got going on here. And really, I just want to select a few polygons here, and then we're just going to delete those. So, in a matter of about a minute and a half here, we have a little roller coaster car. So this also helps me with scale. So now I know kind of how big this car needs to be. And at this stage, I'm going to drop in a quick roller coaster track. And so I just grabbed over here what's called the spline pen tool, and then I set it to B-spline mode, which works a little bit better for like nice like kind of organic shapes that you might want to create. And so something like a roller coaster track, that's definitely the mode you're going to want to be in. And then another thing I like to do when I'm editing these points is you can hide this access band by hitting Alt-D, and then I can kind of get that out of the way and start to make a few edits here real quick to maybe get a nicer shape. And maybe make this thing a little bit bigger. Let's see. Oops. And if you double click those points, they will let you get a little more precise with the exact values. So I think for this purpose, this looks pretty good. And then now that I'm in the perspective view, I'm just going to start to pull them up, in 3D here. So we're getting some vertical dimensionality here on this. And this little dip down here looks like it could be a little tricky. But yeah, let's just say that for all intents and purposes, that's good. And then I'm going to name this spline track. And I'm going to hop back into this front view here, and we'll just quickly draw out a profile. So for this, I want it to be in linear mode, and this is kind of when you want to draw like nice straight lines. And if I turn on under this magnet-looking UI icon, we have our snapping settings. And if I turn that on, I can turn on work plane grid snapping, not guides. I want that one. Let's see, something's... There we go. Work plane snapping. That's what we want. And so now, you know, this is going to snap to the grid. So I'm just going to draw out a quick profile here. And then a little base to this thing that the rest of the track could, in theory, attach to. And then I'll drop in a symmetry object, which this allows me to just dump that in there and get a copy off to the side, or essentially it mirrors it over. And if I go into the 3D view, I'm going to turn off the snapping. If I go into the 3D view, we can see what that symmetry object's doing. But in this case, I want to actually just make that editable and then grab both of these, right-click, and go Connect Objects and Delete. So essentially, it just turned that profile into one spline. And I'll name it Profile. And so really, like, these are our assets for building this. So pretty simple so far. And for this next step, I'm just going to bring in a cloner. I'm going to throw this profile actually in the cloner. I'm going to set the cloner to be in object mode. And then for the actual object that I want to clone these profile splines onto is going to be the track. So you can see probably now that a bunch of those are being copied onto the track. And if I crank up the count a little bit, you can start to see what we're getting here. And what I'm going to do next is bring in a loft object. And if I drop the cloner inside of this loft, you can start to see we're getting some geometry of this track. But it's all tilted and cockeyed and not really what we want. And that is because we need to create a rail spline. So for that, I'm going to make a copy of the track. And we're going to call it track rail. And in our cloner here, we can just throw this track rail in there. And now it's really messed up. But all we got to do is just move it up into the Y direction. And so now you can see that this track rail spline is actually kind of telling the path here where to go. So I can get in here into these points and I can start to manipulate the angle of some of these and start to really get in here and make this, you know, behave more like an actual coaster track would do. So maybe there's like a hard angle there, and we'll do one more over here. So that looks pretty fun and dangerous. So, and then if I go into the cloner here and just uncheck this loop option, that will kind of tighten that gap up a little bit there. But after, you know, in the real project, once I had something built that was what I wanted, I basically made it editable and got in there and connected that up. And there might even be another way to do it within the loft object here. But the next step is I'm going to select both of these tracks and just, I want to set this in intermediate point mode to uniform. And I don't know if you can see, but that kind of like will allow me to smooth out the splines a little bit better. And then under the cloner here, I have control over the resolution, essentially, of this track. But the geometry is really not that important in this case. It's really just kind of getting something laid down so that we can start to get these cars on here. I am going to colorize this real quick so we can see it a little better. So we'll make it a nice gold like it was in that spot. But so, you know, we got our little track here. So all we got to do to get the cars onto this track is bring in another cloner. And this time we're going to put the car proxy inside the cloner here. Go to this object tab, again, set it to object mode. Throw in the track spline. And we definitely need to bring that rail spline in as well. And then for the count here, I'm just going to do 5. And then if I lower this end slider down here, we can see that I can sort of connect these two up. And then really all I need to do to animate these is control this one offset parameter. So that is literally how we set up, you know, the roller coaster rig for that entire project. But I'm going to go into the project settings here, add in a few more keyframes. Let's actually go 250. And I will set a keyframe here and then go down to the end here and we'll go to 100%. And then if I open up my timeline, I definitely want to make sure, let's see here, that this these two keyframes are linear. And what that means is it will just keep that motion nice and linear so there's no easing. And I'm going to hide the track rail. And so now those coasters are just kind of moving along as you'd expect. And then I'm also going to, if we go to the transform tab for the cloner here, we can just throw in a quick color for the cars. So yeah, so that was literally how we set up the cars and the track. And of course there was a bit more modeling involved to get the rest of the roller coaster built out. You know, we have a total of 7 objects in our scene. And, you know, something as complex as this setup is, you know, in Cinema 4D, all it takes is 7 objects to get something like this going, which is just awesome. And I love any project that comes my way when I get in there. I love the challenge of just trying to figure out, like, what's the simplest way I can set this up. So for these tickets, I also kind of came up with what I thought was a pretty darn simple solution. All we did is used a plain geometry and then a spline wrap, which this is a fantastic deformer, easily my favorite out of a few. And then we used this wonderful feature inside of the MoGraph toolset called MoSpline. And what the MoSpline is basically a parametric spline. So I'm adjusting the pitch right now and getting it in this 90-degree angle here. And if I select my spline wrap here, this is essentially going to wrap that plane around this MoSpline. So once I connected that up there, you can see how this plane is mapped to the MoSpline here. And then I can get into the plane and I can play around with the topology and get it kind of nice and even if I need to. But inside of the actual MoSpline, I have all sorts of amazing controls. So I can adjust the length, I can adjust the curve, I can adjust the bend, the twist. So all this stuff you kind of get for free with this object, and it's really like exactly what we needed for these tickets for this particular project. So it was just kind of funny to me how well this worked. It was literally this simple to set up. And so once we had this built, I just basically threw it into this cloner group. So I just created a null there, and then I can take these 3 objects, toss them in there, and you can see that they kind of jump to position there. Now they're inside the cars. I'm going to just hide that spline wrap. And if I hit the play button, you can see now we have our tickets in our coaster here. So again, like, you know, we have now 11 elements in our scene, and we have 5 characters here. So pretty darn simple so far. And then for this, you know, we can always get into the MoSpline here and still, you know, we have control over each little, you know, bit of animation on these tickets in this particular case. So furthermore, the best part of this setup really is the MoSplines are affected by these forces. So if I get in here and bring in this turbulence force here and then hit the play button, you'll see that the MoSplines are like freaking out now, and that's because the turbulence strength is at 5 centimeters, and the scale really is what makes it so intense. So if I bump up the scale to like 500 here, you can start to see that now we're getting some nice like natural movement from those splines inside the coaster. And what's really pretty cool is each one is treated individually. So even though it's a copy of the same Mo spline, we're really getting you know, unique motion on each one. And then I believe for this project we also used a few more forces, and one of which is a wind force, and I just dropped that in my scene here. And we can use fields to actually control specifically where these forces are applied. So I'm just going to bring in a cylinder field, and then if I switch it over to here to +Z and then scale this up, we've essentially created like a tunnel, a wind tunnel here. And I'll get this a little better in position here. We'll see if we can pretend that this is where, you know, one of those tunnels were. And I'll hit the play button and we'll see how this goes. So now you can maybe hopefully see that the tickets are leaning backward. If I turn off the turbulence here, there they go. So, you know, just with these wonderful fields and with all of these forces, we can have really full control over every little thing that's happening to these tickets. And the best part about these is they're all for free. It's just, you know, automatic, free animation. You don't really have to do much more than that. So we increase the wind speed here. Let's see what happens. They start to go back even further. And yeah, you can get a little lost in this stuff playing with it too. So that can be something to consider as well. But now we have 14 objects in our scene, and we've been able to build this. And then you might be wondering, like, well, how would I individualize the animation per ticket? And you can simply just make copies of whatever objects you have in here. So now we have a unique instance of each one of these cars. So let's see which one this is. If I want to get in here and have one of these, this is the one up front. Like maybe it's a little taller, and maybe it's like throwing up over the side here. So yeah, so that's how you would have kind of individual control over that. And really, yeah, so like that entire project, like this was the setup for the roller coasters. So the next thing I'm going to show here real quick is wrong project there. This would be me down here. So I'm going to just open one of the actual scene files from that particular job and show off kind of how the lighting was set up, how quick it renders, and all that good stuff. So this was a particularly fun shot because it was when the coaster is going through the big loop. And if we hit the play button, we can see that, you know, we're getting all that flapping around of those tickets is really just automatically happening from these forces. So if I turn the turbulence off and the wind off, like they're just pretty much static. And then I turn those on, and so we're getting all that for free, which is, when you have to animate something like this, it's pretty great. But if I hop out of the camera here, we can see kind of the whole scene here. There's pretty much the whole coaster, and then, you know, we have this HDRI that's really all we needed to light the entire thing. And if I bring up a Redshift render view, see if I can fire this up and see how it looks when rendered. So yeah, it probably would help if I dock this to the side here. And yeah, you can see kind of the kind of feedback we're getting. And by the way, like this is running on a laptop that's back there in this cube here. So pretty amazing performance. And a lot of that does boil down to the fact that we're using a single HDRI to light it. And I think there was one additional area light to kind of hit the cars as they were going through that loop. But if I turn off the HDRI here, we can see that all we have is some emissive materials, and then literally that HDRI lights the entire scene. And like I said, I did custom make this HDRI for this particular project, but once we had it set, everyone was happy with how everything was looking. We didn't have to touch it. So if I go back to the camera here, kind of get a better view of how that was looking, and then that area light just was hitting those few tickets as they went through there. So yeah, so that's really kind of what I wanted to share on this particular one. And then I have one other awesome project I wanted to share a bit with. So this was for another fantastic studio, but they're based here in Denver, and then I think I have an office in Portland, Hovercraft Studio, and this was for Converse. And on this project, I was kind of tasked to build out a bunch of materials. We had about, I don't know, 9 or 10 shoes that we had to model, build out all the materials for, and get them kind of into these 3D scenes that had been put together from the creative team. And yeah, so for this, I really relied heavily on Substance Designer for building out most of the materials and shaders, but there's a neat little trick by using Cinema 4D to model out a bunch of these shapes. I was able to kind of go through these materials pretty quickly. So I'm going to jump back into Cinema, and then also, actually, I'm going to fire up Substance Designer, which is an incredible tool for just noticing a new splash screen here. I think it's been recently updated. Oh, thanks, Adobe. So we'll see if everything loads up here. There we go. Okay, that's good. That's good. It's a whole new version. So I'll just open up this scene here. We can take a look at just some of the materials that I created for this one. So one of the challenges was definitely this sponge crater, which was definitely kind of a tricky one to do. And it's, this recycled shoe material. And if I hop back to Cinema here, I'll open up the actual one of the scene files here from this one. I believe this is the one. And yeah, this is a pretty old file, so we'll see. But if I fire up the render view here, might have to process a few of these textures, but we can get a better look at this particular material in question. Yeah, so it's processing textures. This is, on first launch of the renderer, usually has to take a second there. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the look we had built for this particular shoe, but it's really driven by these key materials. And if I just kind of get in here, take a closer look here. So, so inside of Substance Designer, I needed a way to get these chunks of debris, and there's loads of different ways that you can do this inside of Designer, but again, like keeping with that idea that I really like to work as simple as possible, I thought, well, I can model these inside of Cinema 4D like really quickly, and then it's just going to be a matter of turning them into height maps and bringing them into Cinema or into Substance Designer here to then use in this material. And then I also did this technique here with a lot of the fabrics. So in this case, it was actually modeling out these fabric shapes so that I could use the tile sampler here to generate these fabrics. But again, like creating a shape like this inside of Substance Designer, while it's definitely possible, I just knew that it would be a lot quicker for me to build out a shape like this in Cinema using splines. But I will demo here how I created this height shader for these chunks. And here's kind of the scene for that. Let me actually just minimize the render view. So, I really just had a very simple setup here. We have a cube, and then I had a couple deformers shaping these different chunks. And what's so cool about this is inside of these displacers, let me show this top one. I can just go into these and just change a seed value and then get a different chunk. So let's say that one looks pretty good. If I hit the render button though, you can see that we're just getting a default Lambert shader, and we need these things to render and look like they do over here, essentially height maps. So we want it to render like that. And to do that, there's a few nodes we can use inside of Redshift here to create a height shader. So I'll just create a quick new material. And let's go to the basic tab, and I'll open up the node editor from here. And then if I dock this down here at the bottom, that usually works pretty good. I don't need that open. So we don't actually need the substance, or a standard surface rather. We just need an empty kind of material here and 3 nodes. So the first one I'm going to bring in is called the state node, and this is a super powerful node within Redshift that we can extract all sorts of data from. And in this case, we need the ray position. So I'm going to take this material and plop it onto this geometry, and we'll might as well turn on the render view here so we can see what we're doing. And then, I don't know, this is a little fun tip if some of you might not be aware. If you right-click on any window that has naming in it, you can actually just uncheck this show window title, and that will hide that bit of text to give us a bit more room. And then I might just zoom out here a little bit. So the last step here in terms of getting this to look correct, I need to go in the color management. I'm going to set the view transform here to raw, and that's going to allow us to kind of view the raw 3D data. So once we got this state node, we want this ray position, and then inside here we have a couple options, but they're kind of already set to what we need. But I'm going to bring in another node, and that is the vector change range node. It's getting a little technical here, but it's pretty simple once you get it set up. And so the reason for the change range is by default, the state node has some negative values, and we want to remap those to kind of be in a 0 to 1 space. And so I'm just going to go into the state node here, and across X, Y, Z in the old range, min, I'm going to punch in -1. And so now we're taking those negative values and we're bringing them up to the 0 to 1 range, so old, new. And then I definitely want to unclamp these values. And we're not going to really be able to see much in the render quite yet, but that is because the values are so extreme, we kind of need to bring them back down a little bit further. But the last node we need here is a scalar, vector to scalar node. And this essentially splits out the channels, the XYZ channels, into their own port that we can then visualize here and bring in as our shader. So we have, X, Y, and Z, of course. But in this case, we want the Y. And then I'll go back to the change range, and this is where I can kind of finally punch in some more realistic values. And so now we can see that we're getting a nice gradation from the base of the scene, which in this case is the world, 0 coordinate space, and then we are kind of mapping those values across the Y direction. So if I grab this bit of geometry and go into our coordinate mode here, I can just move this up and down, and you can see how we're getting some 3D shading on this object based on its position. So back to our camera though, like I can pretty much tell that that's really pretty good for what we needed for these materials. So for that one, I would probably render that out and see how like this one looks. Should probably apply the material. We actually have to apply the material too. But yeah, so that's really just these 3 nodes is how you would build a height shader inside of Redshift. The other thing I'll share quickly is like one reason you might want to build a setup like this is if you, let's say, bring in a ramp node, you could use this information we've pulled out of these nodes to, let's say this is a mountain and you want to isolate like the tree line, so you could very much use a setup like this to create a mask that, would do something like that. So you would have your, your mountains and that's your tree line. So just a bit of a tangent there, but just so you could understand better, like, another way that you might use a setup like this. But in this case, we just want pure height information. And I did kind of have this other scene here where I brought in a Raspberry model from in the asset library here, or asset browser. And, this Raspberry, obviously is something in Substance Designer to build that out with a bunch of shape nodes and whatnot would be pretty tricky process. So this is just another fun example of why you might set something up like this. So I'm going to render this out to the desktop here once I set up the correct paths. So looks like my file from the other day is still there, so we'll just overwrite it. And essentially I just rendered out the height information for this Raspberry model. And if I go back over to Substance Designer, and I'm going to throw this base material onto our little matte ball here. So kind of a neat thing, you can just copy and paste those assets in here. So I'll just copy this EXR file, and if I hit Control V, I'm going to link it in. So now I have this Raspberry inside of Designer here. And I'll switch it over to grayscale because we don't need it to be an RGB image. And then if I hit the space bar here, I'm going to bring in an auto levels node. And that will kind of remap those values so they're kind of optimized. And then let me just, let's see here, get these chunks out of the way. Obviously, if the client did really want some raspberries in here in place of these chunks, we'd render out a few different angles so we get some variation. That's the reason for the 6 ports, is like each one of these is different. But in this case, we're just using the same one. And then if I increase the scale on this node here, this wonderful shape splatter node, we can see here now that we have, instead of chunks, we have some nice raspberries. So again, like this would really be difficult to do inside of Designer from scratch, to get a nice detailed raspberry with like little hairs coming off of it. And so yeah, so that's kind of the technique, and it saved me loads of hours to build everything that way. And then like in here, we can change the colors of all these elements. And yeah, this really gives us full procedural control over this entire material, which is always good. So I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a cookie or something. But yeah, let me show like 1 or 2 more of these setups, and you can get a look at like this. Canvas was a tricky one, and this is like the Converse fabric that needed to be pretty darn accurate to the real thing. And same thing, like it was just easier for me to model these shapes inside of Cinema, and using simple modeling techniques to then get a really complex pattern going inside of Designer. So I think the height map might be, where did we land with the height map? It's one fun thing about opening old projects is it's like, oh no, I don't remember where all this stuff lives. So yeah, so that's the height map that I was able to generate for this particular material. So yeah, so with that kind of concludes the 2 demos I really wanted to share with y'all. And yeah, I mean the last thing I just wanted to give a shout out to all these amazing artists that I've learned Cinema 4D from over the years, like being self-taught, just being able to hop on the internet and look up any one of these people and see what kind of amazing knowledge they're dropping and sharing has been pretty great. So yeah, snap a picture. Some of my faves in here. I definitely couldn't fit everyone in here, but these are just a few that have stood out over the years. And then, yeah, I think that concludes the demo. Thank you. I don't know where Matthias is. There he is. Sorry, I was probably a little quick. Was that a little
never
quick?
Too far away. Never too far away. Awesome. We do have time for questions since Shawn is our last presenter of the day. So take this last opportunity of SIGGRAPH to ask away.
Yeah, please.
I guess that actually rhymed. That was weird. Unintentional internet. That's not a thing. All right. Well, this is your last opportunity, but thank you once again for tuning in to SIGGRAPH 2024 here with Maxon. We will see you at the next shows. Check out our live streams on maxon.net. You can take a look at all of our events. We have plenty. The year is still marches on. So we'll see you then. Thanks again for tuning in. Be good to each other. Take care. Ciao.
See y'all.